Hey folks, welcome back to the show. We have a great episode for you guys today. I'm so excited to be releasing this one. Ever since I recorded it, which was not that long ago, I've been like, oh my God, I can't really wait to release this. Number one, it involves dolphins, which, I mean, really, how could you not enjoy a podcast with that mentions dolphins? And number two, it involves the discovery of a compound that, of a really important compound that's really critical to our health and performance. But before I jump into the podcast, I want to thank you for being here. I would love to encourage you to share this podcast with your network, your friends, anybody else you know that you believe could get value from it, and also invite you to sign up for my email newsletter on natnidham.com. And that's it. That's enough calls to action. That's enough jobs. Okay, let's talk about this episode of the Biohacking Superhuman Performance podcast with Stephanie Venn-Watson. We discuss the first essential fatty acid to be discovered since omegas were discovered over 90 years ago. This essential fatty acid is C15, and it provides 3 times more cellular benefits than omega-3. It plays an essential role in the body at a cellular level, and it targets and reverses the core of how we age. C15 is a saturated fat and acts like a brick for our cells, so it makes them stronger. Cell membranes are made up of fat, so fueling our bodies with the right fat, as you already know, is crucial for defending these cells. It protects the cells from oxidative attacks and helps to fight off aging and chronic diseases. My guest today, Stephanie Venn-Watson, she's amazing. She's a serial entrepreneur. She's an academic. She's an educator. She's involved in not-for-profit. You can read all about her in the show notes. She's an impressive cat indeed. So if you want to learn more about her, you can go to fatty15.com. To learn more about the research behind C15, go to discoverc15.com. A lot of research there. On Instagram, you can follow them at fatty15. And of course, if you want to get your hands on some C15 for yourself and for your family, you can go to fatty15.com/nat, or just go to fatty15.com and use code NAT. All right, now let's jump into this episode. Hey folks, just a quick reminder that all of the information presented in this podcast is for information purposes only. No medical advice, no diagnosing, no treatments suggested here. Before you try anything that you hear about or learn about here, make sure that you check with your medical provider. Welcome to the show, Stephanie. It is such a pleasure to have you here today.
Great, Nathalie. Wonderful to be here.
Yeah, well, I mean, we met at A4M in December, right?
We did.
And I just remember, and I remember meeting you, and that big smile you have on your face now, you had the exact same smile on your face. And it's just like you're one of those people you meet and you go, oh, I want to get to know her. And then you said the word dolphin, and that was the end. I was like, oh my God.
Yeah. It's a wonderful luxury to be able to talk about helping dolphins, for sure.
Yeah. For sure. So, I mean, we're going to talk fat. We're going to talk fat about fat today. And its importance to human health and how it's, been dragged through the mud and back and all the things. But you do have possibly one of the most interesting backstories in this business. So maybe you want to Maybe we should fill people in on why exactly dolphins even are part of the conversation.
Right. I'm not your third podcast this week talking about dolphins and fat. So I am a veterinary epidemiologist, and I was working for World Health Organization and CDC. Now I thought I was going to be chasing Ebola in Africa. That's kind of where I was heading career-wise. And I was recruited unexpectedly by the Navy about 20 years ago to help continually improve the health and welfare of older Navy dolphins. And I thought, well, that'll be fun to do for a couple of years. And it ended up...
It's kind of more fun than Ebola.
Right?
I don't know. I mean, on the fun factor, I don't know. I'm not saying more interesting necessarily, but definitely more fun.
Yeah, exactly. So went to San Diego, worked with the Navy's dolphins. They, it's this population of about 100 bottlenose dolphins Navy has cared for over 60 years. They live in the open ocean. They go out into San Diego Bay, open ocean every day. Every day they choose to come back. They live more than 50% longer than dolphins in the wild. They have lots of babies. It's a very healthy population. And a lot of that has to do with, Navy taking extraordinarily good care. So as a veterinarian, to be honest, I didn't know how I'd feel about dolphins at the Navy. And, I saw immediately that this population gets incredibly good care. Such good care that they can get old. And as in the wild, dolphins live to about 20. At the Navy, they routinely live 40 to 50 years old.
Wow.
Right. So we had this, the Navy had this growing population of geriatric dolphins. And it was amazing, Nat. We found that these dolphins, as they got older, they aged a lot like us. So they were developing high cholesterol and chronic anemia, fatty liver disease, even the full suite of changes consistent with Alzheimer's. And so all of a sudden, yeah, exactly.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Question. Excuse me.
Yes, you there in the front.
Over there in the corner. So are they eating the same diet that they would eat in the wild? The Navy dolphins?
It's a great question. So they all eat fish. So that's a good starting point, right? And it's a curious starting point because all dolphins eat, for the most part, are fish. But different dolphins at the Navy were eating different types of fish, which were different than dolphins eat in the wild. So exactly. So we got to be able to see, basically we did the study to look at while we were noticing that dolphins were aging like us, what was fascinating is that some dolphins were aging better and healthier than others, which got us to the fish to say, is there something in the fish? And we thought it'd be omega-3s that would predict the healthiest aging dolphins. So we were able to use Metabolomix, looking at thousands of small molecules in their blood and their fish diet to kind of figure out which small molecule was the predictor of the healthiest aging dolphins.
Wow. And so different dolphins were eating different fish because that's just what their trainer was feeding them, or because they like different fish, or is there kind of like dolphin junk food fish?
Right. Well, yes, it's fascinating that you say that because there absolutely, because different dolphins were eating different types of fish, in part because of preferences, and it might be the preference of their trainer, or it might be the preference of the dolphin. So there were about 5 different fish types that they're offered, and some were getting a lot more of, one versus another type. And so wonderfully, it was so clean being able to tell which nutrients from which fish were the benefit that we were able to, make some really important discoveries.
Yeah. And so that's when you honed in on this one type of fat, right? So we're going to transition from dolphins. I'm sorry, guys. We want to stay on dolphins because they're super cute, but, and I do think it is remarkable to have a population of dolphins that are, as an entity, like they're just so intelligent. They come back willingly. If they're having babies, then clearly they're happy. Like nobody's making them have babies, right? Like unhappy, stressed animals, like people, don't make babies. They wouldn't come. I mean, they could bug out. So it's pretty interesting, right? That this quasi captivity, which is not really captivity, is the symbiotic relationship, I guess, that develops between the dolphins and the trainers.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Animals, when they're happy, they eat, they live longer, and they have babies, just like you shared.
Okay, but now apparently they also get heart disease and type 2 diabetes and all these things. So this is super fascinating. And so this really brought you to this whole place of the saturated fat that you discovered that was lacking in some dolphins and present in others. And this is all through Metabolomix, which is, this word Metabolomix is starting to come up over and over again, even in human health. So maybe we could explain to people briefly what Metabolomix is.
Yeah, absolutely. So Metabolomix are, the study of, for the most part, small molecules that it might be in our serum or in our tissues. It could be in different things. You might hear about the gut. metabolome. In this case, we were looking at small molecules that were present in the blood. That would be in us or them, as well as their fish. And there are thousands of small molecules present, and it could be different types of fats and proteins and carbs. We were just talking about this earlier. So it's, if you think about when you go to the doctor and you get a blood test, right, for your health, and there's a set number, maybe up to 40 things. This kind of takes that world of a blood test and it blows it up to 1,000 things. Mm-hmm. And so when you start getting something that big, then it gets hard to actually figure out what they mean in humans because we're super complicated. Like we have such diverse lives and backgrounds and environments that it's hard to take thousands of small molecules and make meaning out of them. What was great about the dolphins was they're all in the same population, eating for the most part a pretty limited diet and getting the same health care. So we were able to, thanks to the dolphin, make sense of this otherwise very complicated set of data and get it really quickly narrowed down to the molecules that were most important. Kind of like, what are the next things that should be on our blood test to let us know if we're healthy or not.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. So how did you ever hone down to saturated fat though? Because you would think like, well, not so much cardiovascular disease, but you said type 2 diabetes. So type 2 diabetes, you would sit there and go, okay, well, that must be, are they grabbing chips along the way on their mission out and coming back? Like, what's
right. And that's where this was a huge question for specific to fatty liver disease, right? So non-alcoholic fatty liver disease now affecting 1 in 3 people globally. It seemingly came out of nowhere, 1980, and then now present again, 1 in 3, 1 in 10 kids. So fatty liver disease, we also discovered it in the dolphins. And to your exact question, Nat, Dr. Jeff Schwimmer, I was at Rady Children's Hospital. He opened the first fatty liver disease clinic in the world for kids. And Jeff reached out and he's like, I saw your paper on fatty liver disease in dolphins. And I don't think it's going to be the same because, we think it's driven by sugar and other things that dolphins don't eat. So, can I take a peek at your dolphin livers? so we sent him.
Can you mail me some dolphin liver, please?
Your average, request. So we sent him archived tissue samples of dolphin livers, and I'll never forget the email that came back. The title was "We Are a Go," and Jeff is like, it's fatty liver disease. He goes, it is the exact same thing that we are seeing in kids and we're seeing in people. He's like, what's going on? Because to your point, they're not eating chips. They're not eating sugar. This is, was shocking. And so that's where, and then now we talk about when we were able to do this analysis and look at dolphins with or without fatty liver disease, with or without high glucose, the C15, again, a saturated fat unexpectedly popped up as one of the top predictors of the healthiest dolphins without these diseases.
That's fascinating. So, wow, I almost feel like we got to the punchline too fast, but that's really interesting, right? So that the presence or absence of a saturated fat of all things,
right,
would be a predictor. And so so bummer, you couldn't get pieces of liver from the kids because that would be really unethical. So kids with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So where do you go from there? So you establish that the presence of this fat is somehow protective, or where did it kind of go from there?
Yeah, so that was the question, right? So at that point, it was association, right? So dolphins with higher levels of C15, lower risk of having this whole like insulin resistance and high glucose and fatty liver disease. They were all tied together, just like it is in people. It ends up that the same relationships were being discovered in humans at the same time. Yeah.
Get out.
So
you're kidding.
It's just amazing, right? And you see this happen a lot, right? When discoveries get made, like big groundbreaking discoveries, you have multiple different entities from around the world who are kind of honing in and finding the same thing. So around the same time, there were a handful of large-scale epidemiological studies showing that people who have higher C15 have a lower risk of having and even developing type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and then eventually the papers came out on fatty liver disease, including Jeff Schwimmer. So Dr. Schwimmer did his own study looking at kids' livers, but via, using digital imaging. And showed that the more C15 kids had in their blood, the less fat they had in their liver. So now we have parallel things happening in dolphins and humans, but it's association. So the next step was then to move C15 into the lab and say, okay, can we get beyond association? Is there evidence that C15 can directly and actively improve or prevent these diseases? So we did 8 studies over 3 years and worked with a leader in fatty acids, Dr. Ed Dennis. He was the editor for the Journal of Lipid Research for 15 years. And so we did a series of studies. And at the end of it, that was our paper that we published in Nature Scientific Reports, showing that C15 isn't just an active and beneficial fat, that it's meeting these rare criteria of being an essential fatty acid, the first to be discovered since omega-3, which was over 90 years ago.
Wow. That's a big gap.
That's a big gap.
Like, that's a massive gap. And it just goes to show you, right? You don't know what you're missing because you don't know what you're looking for. Like, you don't know what to look for, right? I mean, this is the magic, the mystery, and the craziness of the human body is we don't even know what we're missing because you don't necessarily know. And, it amazes me that some of the podcasts that have the most blown my mind over the last year or two have all had to do with some kind of fat.
Yeah.
Right. There's this saturated fat, there's plasmalogens, which is phospholipids, which is a type of fat. And then there's even things like phosphatidylcholine, which is another phospholipid. And it amazes me how critical, like how much of a just literally how critical these tiny little fats are to our health. And yet, and I know that you talk about this a lot, is how fat's been like beaten and burned and dragged through the mud. And, like there have been people, not so much now, I don't think, but there have been people over the last few decades who literally cut fat out completely from their diets, thinking that, it's got to be margarine and skinless, boneless chicken breast, if we're even going to go there. And, and so they just like pulled fat completely out of their diets and ended up kind of not well as a result. So it's just so interesting to me how critical fat is to human health. So have you gotten basically insight into how this all works? Like, how is this saturated fat, that's basically working in conjunction with all these other essential fatty acids and phospholipids? What's it doing? Because reading through the literature that I got my hands on, it's playing a role that we never talk about when it comes to fat.
Absolutely. Oh, what a tee up that was. Yes, that was fantastic. Wow. So it's
eating you the balls.
C15 has a really unique role, and it has some that are complementary with other fats, but the unique role that you're alluding to is it strengthens our cell membranes. And so when we talk about that, we talk about our body, right? We are completely made of cells. Our cells are, each and every one of them is protected by a two-layer membrane, and that membrane is made out of fat. Our cell membranes, remarkably, they literally are what we eat. And many studies have shown that even what you eat, if you eat the same diet for like a period of 3 days, it will completely change the makeup of your cell membrane. Like, it's that fast.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So C15 is, because it's a saturated fat, and we're talking about, just a quick saturated fats 101, right? Is that that we have, that ends up, there are 2 main forms of saturated fats. They're called even chain and odd chain. And the even chain saturated fats are those that have an even number of carbons in it, like C16 and C18. Those are present at really high levels in the traditional foods that we think about. And they are continually associated, higher levels continually associated with the bad stuff, like increased risk of type 2 diabetes, heart disease, in the dish. They're pro-inflammatory. So they don't get a get out of jail free card. But these odd chain saturated fats like C15 and C17, they have the opposite effect. And so just one carbon change determines whether a saturated fat is good. It's like, it is amazing how specific nature is with regard to fats. And so these odd chain fats are the opposite. They're anti-inflammatory. And they are, this lower risk of type 2 diabetes, heart disease, fatty liver disease. So understanding that, we get to these odd chain saturated fats, and saturated fats have no double bonds in them. They're just like super sturdy little molecules that don't bend. So think of them as having no hinges, just a chain of particles with hinges. And every time you put a double bond in, it's a hinge, which oxygen can attack. And it's a weak point, basically, that leads to what's called lipid peroxidation. Long story short, just makes them oils and susceptible to attack by oxygen. Because C15 doesn't have any double bonds, it is an incredibly sturdy fat that goes into our cell membranes and literally serves a function like a brick inside that helps to basically shore up our cells so that each and every one of our cells is able to, better fight off, oxidative radicals and aging and chronic diseases.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. We were talking about this earlier that, the human body is going to use, like, it needs fat for the cell membrane. One way or another, by hook or by crook, it can't use anything but fat. And so what you give it is what you will use. It will use. And I think that one of the reasons why there's so much trouble, like so many health problems, is from, and, we talk about damaged fats, oxidized fats, rancid fats, that the cell membrane, that the body, in the absence of what it would love, is going to use what you give it.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah. And so, which is where it really ups the ante on getting the right fats in the diet. So, so people are going to be sitting there going, okay, well, this is interesting. Dolphins, this fat, I'm a people. Where would I normally get this kind of fat from? Like, is there a natural way, or do I have to go diving with the dolphins? Like, how do I get these fats? Because they're not necessarily only from fish. Like, I guess they do come from fish, which is where we think we're getting our our other the omega-3 from.
That's right. Yeah. So they obviously they are present in fish. When we looked at the dolphins, but not all fish have C15, which is why some dolphins had lower levels than others. And when we actually dove into understanding C15 presence within the fish, it's mainly in the skin and the heads of the fish, which of course dolphins eat. They don't get little fillets, but we don't. We tend to
not as much.
Right. We tend to skip that. So by far, as humans, our primary source of C15 is dairy fat. And it's such a whole dairy fat. And it's such a reliable measurement of whole dairy fat that C15 has been used for decades as a biomarker of how much fat we eat, of how much dairy fat we eat.
Oh my God, you're kidding.
And so it's been looked at for a long time, but everyone kind of, anytime they saw an association between C15 and better health, they said, it's a biomarker of dairy fat. Therefore, dairy fat is better for our health. They never thought that, well, maybe this molecule itself may be the benefit.
Well, and the narrative of dairy fat is better for our health is a struggling narrative in the best of times. I mean,
right. And it's so messy. And we now understand why, because dairy fat has 1% of C15 in it, of the fats. It has 40% of these pro-inflammatory even chain saturated fat. So it's milk is kind of just like going to throw everything at you, and take chronically for long periods of time. The pro-inflammatory fats tend to outwin that 1%.
And is that in all whole milk, or is it just does pasteurization affect it in homogenization? Because my impression is that in those places where people can get access to raw milk, it seems to be a little bit different. Like, even homogenizing milk modifies the fat and the way our body picks it up.
Yeah, it does. So there's less on the differentiation between the homogeneous and the raw. But you're right, Nat, there are definitely differences between the two, nutrition wise. But the interesting studies on C15 have really come from what the cows eat. So if a cow is fed corn, it has less C15, even in its whole milk, whole fat, than if it's fed grass. And even the specific types of grass, like there was one really cool study where they took goats, and the farther up a goat grazed on this hill, the more C15 they had in their milk. So it was dependent upon high grass. So, and we don't have that on our cartons, right? It doesn't say cow was fed corn, or so we really don't know how much C15 is in each given.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you now do, I mean, there is now grass-fed milk at least, but to your point, if the type of grass has that much of an influence, and I've read stuff that talks about, cows choosing different types of grass depending on what their needs are. Like, Mother Nature in innate wisdom is so beyond us. And the challenge is that, the farmer, the rancher that's trying to bring grass-fed products to market. And I know nothing about this. So if somebody's listening and knows, please pipe in at some point in the comments. But I don't know how much control they even have. Like maybe they're like, are they where they are? And maybe that's why New Zealand dairy might be better than North America. Like, who knows, right? Like geography may have something to do with it. So that's super fascinating. Okay. So there's a question I need to ask you. What were the junk fish? What was the fish that didn't have the C15? I'm a little bit fascinated by this.
So at the Navy, they're called capelin, and they're really little fish. They have very low fat. And they're caught, usually they're Norwegian. Yeah, they're caught in Norway. Okay. And so it's the main reason probably why these had low C15, or a big reason, is that they're have very little fat in them. Okay. So likely, kind of the chips of the sea situation for capelin. Yeah. So, and that ended up being a big determinant. And obviously the Navy didn't know it's a fish, right? And so, didn't know that these, didn't even know that C15 is something we should care about. But once we had these studies, they were able then now to change the types of fish that the dolphins are getting so that they have adequate C15 levels. So it was good to be actionable for them.
And then by reinstating C15 for some of the dolphins, did that help to reverse some of the conditions that they were suffering?
It did.
Or once it did?
Yes. I mean, so that was the fun part, right? So, like, for example, we know that, as dolphins get older, just like us, anemia of chronic disease or anemia of aging is something that a subset of dolphins developed. And so when we actually did a feeding trial where we gave about 20 dolphins a high C15 fish diet and kept 10 dolphins on the regular diet. Of those 20 dolphins that were given the high C15 diet, 10 of them incidentally had anemia. And we, within 1 month on this modified diet, the anemia was getting better. By 3 months, every dolphin anemia was gone. So when we looked in and analyzed the data further into what fats were in the cell membrane of the red blood cells, right, of how you define anemia, we found that higher C15 independently predicted this resolution of anemia. And we were able to repeat that later in the lab. So again,
and on the 10 dolphins that didn't get the high C15 diet, did they eventually get the high C15?
They do, yeah. So now they're all equal opportunity at the
leave behind no dolphin left behind.
No dolphin left. Yeah, exactly.
But that's so fascinating, right? Because in my world where I'm in touch with some fairly large communities of people and people who are constantly sharing about their health challenges, and anemia is something that comes up a lot. And you get a certain percentage of people who, like, it doesn't matter what they do.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how much iron they take. Like, they are perpetually anemic. And I don't know, I mean, I could be wrong, but people talk about the Bs. Yeah. Like the B6, B9, B12, we talk about eating iron-rich foods, mainly red meat and, if you liver and whatever else. But nobody's talking about a particular fat to maybe give, and I guess I wonder if it just gives that cell membrane the strength to almost hold on to the iron. I mean, I don't, I'm making it up now. I'm going into fantasy land, but But what role could this fat possibly have in the the cell being able to hold on to iron?
Yeah, absolutely. So we now know that the red blood cell, and now probably all of our cells, that when we ingest more C15, that C15 goes into our cell membranes, helps make them more stable. This includes our red blood cells. And
Mm-hmm.
so if we don't have enough C15 in our cells, including our red blood cells, they get more fragile and they're more
Mm-hmm.
susceptible to lipid peroxidation. So they get weaker, they fall apart faster. And that is a contributor to, this anemia
Anemia.
kind of unknown concentrating on that,
Yeah.
like what you're talking about, that some people try. And the other thing is, there's not, aside from unless you have iron deficiency anemia, there's not a long term treatment for anemia. And and we know
Mm-hmm.
that people with anemia have it's just higher risk of frailty, of longer hospital visits. We're tired. It's been something that in the old days being like the 1990s, physicians will just be like, you have anemia. That's what comes with age. so,
Yeah.
so
Thanks so much. Thanks for that.
thanks for confirming my age. But now it's well understood that it's a pathological process of aging that with more and more of a drive to fix it. So that was a fascinating and unexpected outcome in the dolphin study that we've then been able to show, prove directly since. So
Mm-hmm.
exciting ability. And then if it's doing this in the red blood cells, then the picture is, what is it doing, how it's helping cells throughout our whole body. Uh,
I was going to the brain.
mhm.
Do we have data on the brain?
We don't have a lot
Not
of data
yet.
on the brain. We don't have a lot of data because there's
The brain is fat.
right. It's
I mean, the brain is fat. And the nervous system, like it's the myelin sheath and the
yeah, it's so important. There are select studies, but I have to say, compared to the studies on C15 and type 2 diabetes and heart disease and fatty liver disease, and even cancer, there are a lot of studies with C15 showing it as protective. For the brain, it's sparse. And I don't know if it's because it hasn't been looked at or because it doesn't have as strong of an association. So just need more time to happen. And what's nice is that
Mhm.
researchers in different fields are now testing C15. So the papers on C15 and the research has been growing dramatically. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you would think that even from a historical perspective, because labs keep samples of people of brains, right?
Mhm.
So it's going to take someone taking interest and saying, okay, let's go back and look at these brain samples and say, the brains that were affected by whatever XYZ,
Mhm.
how do they compare to a healthy brain with respect to this particular saturated fat? Like, I think that could be such an interesting eureka moment because and maybe you just focused on the metabolic stuff because that's what the dolphins were showing up with. They weren't showing up necessarily with dementia, and if they were, you might not have noticed as much because
They're dolphins.
what is it? i mean
Right.
i mean I guess maybe they got lost, they didn't come back, you didn't know.
Yeah, and I think what's encouraging on the encouraging front, and you're exactly right, the studies need to be done to confirm whether or not there's an association. If so, how strong. What has been encouraging is we know that C15 has activities and metabolites that are expected to improve cognitive function and brain health. So, for example, C15 activates these receptors called PPARs. And PPARs are well known targets for the brain to help reduce inflammation, to help improve signal transduction that is weakened with regard to Alzheimer's and dementia. We fascinatingly, when we went back to the dolphins and the metabolites, we found a second molecule, which was really interesting. And it ended up that the second molecule is just a molecule that our body makes using C15. And this molecule was a full activator was a fully acting endocannabinoid. So it was fully activating CB1, CB2, and was mimicking serotonin. And so all of
No
these
kidding.
activities are expected to help with sleep, with anxiety, and these interestingly are what we get consistently reported from people who are taking C15.
Huh. Wow, that's fascinating. Actually, in your That's so cool. And I guess, I mean, it'll be interesting to see where that research eventually goes, just to understand. But I mean, that sure doesn't sound like it's going to hurt. And, you know, going back to the dairy issue, I mean, so many people have cut out dairy because there's so much, I mean, whether they're terrified of saturated fat, or whether they're lactose intolerant, or whether they've bought into the low fat dogma. You know, there's just been, and dairy being inflammatory and so many people being sensitive to it, it kind of just turns it automatically into not the best source. Does ghee have C15 in it? Do you know?
Ghee does.
Clarified butter?
Yeah. So ghee has C15. Butter, just regular butter, has C15. It's, you know, concentrated really form of C15. So it can be a good source. It still also has the pro-inflammatory saturated fats, but I don't shy away from ghee or my pat of butter at all.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, I mean, different people are affected differently by fat, right? So some people look at fat, and I mean, dairy fat specifically. Some people look at dairy fat. And is it present also in cheese?
It is.
Oh.
Yeah, I know, right? That's a huge one. It's my justification for cheese.
A cheese platter. Oh, no. I'm not having cheese. I'm actually just topping up my intake of
C15.
Just my membranes are feeling a little weak right now, so I just thought I'd have some camembert.
Yeah.
I'll be done in a minute.
I love it.
So in the research, there's actually mention of something that I talk about a lot. We talk about, because the podcast has kind of like this overarching theme of longevity, we talk about the hallmarks of aging a lot. And in the literature, I think it might have been on your website or some other literature, I found that noticed that there's actually 3 hallmarks of aging that are targeted specifically by C15. And you mentioned at least one of them a minute ago in the cell signaling, right?
That's right. Yeah. So once we had discovered that C15 was meeting the rare criteria of being an essential fatty acid, right? Which means that our bodies have to have certain levels of it, but our bodies can't make it. Therefore, we have to get certain levels from our diet. Then if it's really essential, then it should positively impact our health span and our lifespan. And there was an interesting, on the cell strengthening part, there's this fascinating theory from A.J. Holbert in Australia. And he came up with this theory called the cell membrane pacemaker theory of aging. And in that, he showed that humans, he looked at mammals, and he showed that humans had more saturation, more stable fatty acids in their cell membranes than shorter lived animals, mice. And he actually did a linear relationship on how long a mammal's lifespan is, was tied to how stable basically the fats were in their cell membranes. It was fascinating, right? And he showed that they had less lipid peroxidation levels, which now all of a sudden you're getting to aging. And we're basically, the longer our cell membranes can fight off oxygen from killing us, the longer we live. It's a lifespan enabling thing. So getting back to the hallmarks of aging, you know, when we were seeing that it's essential, then the question is, well, can we find how is it as a longevity supporting nutrient? And so we looked at hallmarks of aging first, and that's where we found, Nat, like you just said, that we showed that it helps with cellular signaling, including the heart of the human longevity pathway of activating AMPK and inhibiting mTOR. So it's really hitting at the heart of what is well established as, if you do these things, it should support longevity. And then it helps decrease with regard to, you know, by inhibiting mTOR, it helps decrease the formation of these zombie cells, the senescent cells, and helps get the bad cells cleared out. It also helps repair mitochondria, mitochondrial dysfunction being the third hallmark of aging. And then a fourth actually came up because in 2023, there was a new and updated list of hallmarks of aging, which included inflammaging. Inflammation with aging, and it's very clear that C15 decreases many, over a dozen different pro-inflammatory cytokines. So it has all these great effects. So we then, from there, we then tested, we put pure C15 head to head against the leading longevity molecules, rapamycin, metformin, and acarbose. And we showed that C15 had the most cellular benefits and was really close to rapamycin. And so the question was rapamycin, like we didn't have to necessarily go to Easter Island to get this complicated bacteria rapamycin that grows from rare bacteria. It may just be C15 is what we've been meant to have all along to help us live healthier and longer.
Only it's been in stealth mode all this time.
Exactly. And then you're just like, okay, every mammal gets this at birth, and then and now we've taken it away. Yeah, stealth mode. Go dolphins.
Yeah. So that's interesting you bring that up. So I'm guessing that mother's milk is fairly rich in C15.
It is, as long as mom has enough C15. So, right, that opens the question of, as we get more generations having lower C15, mom's C15 levels determine how much C15 she has in her milk. And infant formula, unfortunately, has almost no C15 in it. So it's, as we learn more, it'll become increasingly important to understand when and where we need to get C15 back into our life.
So you would think that adding, at some point, enriching formula for babies who, for whatever reason, can't nurse or don't nurse.
That's right.
Would be pretty important to be, because they're not going to get it from anywhere else at that stage of the game.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And so there's, and there have been calls for this, independent of us, of folks that have been looking at babies who get more C15, which is from mom's milk. They have healthier growth. They have larger brains or head circumference, indicative of brain health. And so because of these, there have been calls to action from groups outside of us saying exactly not what you just said, which is we really need to look at infant formulas and how can we get C15 back in to help fortify those.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. So so is it, because now, I mean, maybe there's a mom listening to this and, for whatever reason that baby's getting formula and she's like, okay, can I take a capsule and pop it open and drop it in the formula? Like, I mean, there's no research on it. Yeah. I mean, there's such a stigma around saying anything to any pregnant mom or any infant. And yet somehow maybe telling moms when they're pregnant to just bump up their C15 somehow.
So moms can. We did go through and we had C15 assessed. So first of all, C15 is in milk, right? So if moms, and there are no recommendations telling pregnant mothers or nursing moms to stop drinking milk. So that's a good safe.
And eat better.
Yeah, eat better. We also looked at the pure C15 and had chose to put it through a process called GRAS, which is generally recognized as safe status. And that's where you have independent toxicologists look at the data. And so they showed that they concluded that pure C15 is safe for adults, children older than 4, and including pregnant and nursing moms. So the younger than 4,
they're just stopping short of hitting the babies.
We're getting close. Yeah. And we'll get there. It's just we're one step at a time. And now that all these studies have been coming out with regard to the youngest set, I think that's really going to help push, what needs to get done to ensure it's safe and how much that, the infants get.
Yeah. So how long has this been around as a supplement? Like, it's pretty new, right? Like, I mean, you guys just kind of exploded onto the landscape. I mean, I've been seeing stuff around for a little while, but not that long in the grand scheme of the world.
No, it's so the supplement's been out since 2021. Wow. So not long at all.
What great timing for launch.
Right. I know. What? Yeah. So, and it's actually because of COVID that we went to put it out as a supplement. And it's because, we had done at that point, over 8 years of studies on C15. We had all of the peer-reviewed work. We had, done all of the work. And we're still, because we're scientists, right? And physicians and veterinarians. And at some point along this journey, our advisors are like, enough is enough. Like, it's time to bring it to
come on.
Like, you're proposing it as an essential fatty acid. It's time to get it out to the world. And, we thought we were going to do it as a pharmaceutical because that was kind of where our mindset, like potential treatments for fatty liver disease, type 2 diabetes. And that track is expensive and long. And when COVID came, we realized, gosh, this is going to delay the pharmaceutical route. And at the same time, this essential fatty acid discovery was made. And so it's just like, it's a natural ingredient. You can bring this to the world now.
It's foundational. Like it would have been actually tragic if it had gone the pharmaceutical route, right? Because I just think it would have been so much harder. As you say, it would have taken longer, and who knows where it would have gone. Whereas at this stage of the game, from the sounds of it, like, if you're eating a ton of butter and a lot of cold water fish, maybe you may well be meeting your needs, but for most of us, that's not a reality.
Yeah, that's right. And so, we brought, C15 supplement, fatty 15 to the world out of what our advisor called a moral obligation. Living though, like you've had your whole careers. My husband is a Navy physician, and the two of us, helped basically take on this endeavor in partnership with the Navy. But it was, it's something that needed to happen. And so after all the science, that led to us bringing the supplement to the market. So that we brought it to the market in 2021, and it's sold out in 6 weeks. Now we have over 95% monthly customer retention rate, which is unheard of. And it really just speaks to the science, that people are feeling better.
Well, and I think once you understand what's involved, and what's interesting, one nuance that took me a little while to figure out was, okay, well, is this C15 instead of my EPA DHA? And it's not. It's just in addition. It's like it's part of the stack.
Yeah, I think about it like as a vitamin. That would you take vitamin A and not vitamin C? The big thing with the EFAs, with like EPA, with your omega 3s and your omegas, is just ensuring that you're getting the absolute highest quality, because like we talked about, these are really fragile fats that are susceptible to oxidation. So ensuring that what you're getting, and that the best way to get omega 3s because of their fragility is through food.
100%.
Yeah, and then
millions of fishy burps would attest to that. Like when you eat fish, you don't have fishy burps. But when you take your omega-3, like if it's not good and it's not the right one, guess what? Like it's not a pleasant couple of hours after that. Like it can be really unpleasant. So, which brings me to, even though I said this wasn't going to be a big old ad for Fatty 15, at the end of the day it is, but it's only because it's so, like, this is so important. Right. And it's such fresh information. And it's so, like, as we just said, like all of the people who do what I do, like we have these foundational supplements, because people in our community, some of them are taking 50 supplements a day or 20 supplements a day. And it's like, they're ready to lose their minds. And every once in a while, somebody says, could you just tell me what I really need to take if I was going to pare it back? And so we pare it back. And it sounds to me like this is the foundation, like with your your essential fatty, your omega 3s, like this is part of that building block that you need for everything else to work properly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's important. So where do you get your C15 from? Because there's no fishy burps. Right. Also, it's itty bitty little teeny tiny capsules. You guys, this will be the easiest supplement you will ever take if you choose to go there. I mean, you could always eat a stick of butter a day, and if that works for you, that's amazing. But if you went this route, it's this teeny tiny, the cutest little capsule. It's like next to nothing, and there's no fish involved.
No fish, no cows. Which is great. So we chose, if we're going to bring this to the world, let's do it right. Let's make it vegan friendly. Let's not have, it's because it's a stable fat, it's not an oil. So anything that says it has C15 in it and it's an oil means it's not, you're kind of messing with the power of C15. So because it's, the stable fat, it's a solid at room temperature, and all we need is a tiny amount, which is aligned with what we used to get from our diet. So we used to get back in the days, right, of like 100 to 300 milligrams of C15 every day from our diet, mainly from drinking that great, whole fat milk when it was
Mm-hmm.
great.
Back in the day. Yeah.
So that's why, so this, the supplement isn't intended to be like this super supplement where we give you 100 times the dose. It truly is, it's supplementing the amount that our cells really need. And if you think about, we talked about the cell membranes being stable, they don't need to be made completely out of C15. They just need enough of the stable fat in there to keep it stable. And we know the specific levels, it's like 5 micrograms per mil or 0.2% is the stable. And if you get below that, the cell falls apart. So it's truly a line that multiple studies are now supporting is like, as we get below that, is probably, again, get defined as a nutritional C15 deficiency. Just because our cells just can't hold together. It just needs just enough. So hence one tiny pill, which is great.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. And so it's it's basically synthesized in a lab.
So
it's synthetic.
So we take plant-based C14 and we add a carbon onto it. So, and so that way we're able exactly to make it, so it's the exact same molecule, plant-based and pure, 99.5, in some cases, 100% pure ingredient, which is great, which is why it works.
Yeah, no kidding. And so, but would you say that is there a possibility that someone who's got metabolic imbalances, so they have, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease or type 2 diabetes, they've got any one of those conditions we talked about, is there a possibility that they might benefit from doing a slightly higher dose initially to kind of reload? And I mean, I guess eventually someday, I don't think there is right now for humans that I know of, but maybe someday you'll be able to get a lab test and assess what your C15 levels are,
right,
and see how down you are.
Yeah, Nat, you're so good. That was an amazing segue. So first of all, so we, you can get a test, which Genova Diagnostics, right?
Who knew?
And we're not associated with them, just so you know, but they have a fatty acid test that a lot of functional doctors have used for a long time. And when we've been chatting with them, they're like, wait, what? And then they go back and they're like, wait, I've been collecting C15 all along. And wait, right, this person has low C15 and this person has low C15. And it appears to be successfully picking up the same definition that we and the scientific papers has shown is low. So they have both a blood spot test that could get ordered from home, and then they have the red blood cell membrane test of going to the doctor or a clinic and getting
a blood draw.
And so there is a clinical, as far as efficacy, obviously, fatty 15 is a supplement. It's not intended to treat, prevent, cure, the whole FDA statement. And it really is not intended for that. More and more physicians are using C15 to guide the health of their patients. And those the 2 capsules, and including using 200 milligrams now, and like you're alluding to, now having this test so that you can see, gosh, can we just get you up and over that, at least that minimum, and maybe using 200 milligrams to do that.
Yeah. And then you scale back. I mean, we do it with vitamin D3 when people are super low or whatever the case may be. Like the idea of loading the body when it's deficient and then pulling back to a stable kind of maintenance dose is not entirely foreign.
Right. Exactly. So, and then but we do recommend, like, try for, when people reach out, is just to try one. We're not trying to push pills, right? It's just like, try one. It works for most people. Where one a day, and it's like, give it 3 months. And most people, about half people, feel better within 2 weeks, which is extraordinary. Dolphins didn't tell us that part.
They can't.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, did you get a better sleep last night?
Like they would, but they can't.
But as far as like with people with existing chronic conditions, we were going the drug route now because we were seeing that very real potential. And so wonderfully, there are 2 clinical trials. One that results came out just last month, where they use C15 supplementation. It's higher at 300 milligram dose among women with fatty liver disease. They gave them the Mediterranean diet. They gave them on top of a low calorie diet. So to do something above and beyond eating 1,000 calories a day on the Mediterranean diet, and then they gave them C15 was like a big ask, and it did. So see, people who had low calorie plus Mediterranean compared to people low calorie Mediterranean plus the C15 supplement, the C15 supplement group did even better. So they had lower LDL cholesterol, and they had a healthier microbiome, gut microbiome of growth of a particular, super interesting, of a bacteria called Bifidobacterium adolescentis, which is actually helped several species live longer, which is also interesting. And people had less central fat who took the C15 supplement. So, and then the second clinical trial, so that was published late last year in 2023. And there's a second one coming out. It's currently in review. But that was looking at young adults who were overweight and have history of fatty liver disease, and seeing how C15 supplementation went. So I can't share the results, but stay tuned.
Yeah, I have a feeling it's not going to be a negative. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I can say that.
I'm just sitting here like itemizing mom, dad.
Yeah.
All the people. Wow. So this is fascinating. And this is so, I don't know. This is so exciting, right? I mean, you must be like, no wonder you've got that giant smile on your face, because, like you not only caught the wave, but it just keeps going and going and going. Like when you hit something like this, that is so foundational to health.
Oh, it's been great. It's been a gift. I know, it's just like the good fortune of opportunity comes your way. Like leaving, thinking I'm going to take a little break from my career to go work with dolphins, ended up being this incredible opportunity. So that was an important lesson.
Well, and congratulations on all your success. I mean, talk about changing the world. You're really going to change the world. Like, that's so cool. Okay. Well, I mean, I could keep you here longer, because then we could just get into individual dolphin personalities and things, but maybe we'd lose the audience. So, okay. Well, Stephanie, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you especially for, taking that step away from your career, supposedly, and hitting like just doing this amazing work. So let's tell people where they can find you and find out more. And I know that you have a website that's devoted to the research around Fatty 15, and it sounds like there's more coming down every 10 minutes. So
absolutely. So you can find Fatty 15 at fatty15.com, and that's where you can see the supplement and all the science behind that. And then all the science around C15, all the peer-reviewed papers and everything, we keep updated at discoverc15.com is where you can find that.
Amazing. And guys, we've got a great offer for you guys from Fatty 15. So all you have to do is go to Fatty 15, the number 15, that is. So fatty15.com/Nat, or use discount code Nat, and you'll get a special discount on your order of C15, which will apparently make every cell in your body function better. Like, oh my God, who would have thunk it? And we'll find out even more about all the good things that it does for us as time goes on. So Stephanie, thank you so much. Great. This has been so fun.
No, this was a pleasure. Thank you for helping to bring it to the world.
My pleasure. Believe me.